Hello, movie world. Welcome to the greatest movie director bracket podcast. Title pending. So, today we're going to be talking about Andrei Tarkovsky's The Sacrifice versus Carl Theodor Dreyer's Day of Wrath. My name is Matthew Moore, and joining with me is a guy who I think has only willed one person to death. Caleb Ferguson. Caleb, what's going on?
Hey man, I'm happy to be here. I'm excited for this round.
Are you excited for this round?
Oh, very much so.
I feel
I'm gonna
like
go off. Get ready
you're.
for it.
Oh, jeez. I don't want to hear you going off. You're not going to will one of these directors to death, are you?
Mm,
I
I
think
don't
one
know.
of them's
We'll have to
already
see.
dead, actually. I think they're both already dead. Yikes.
Probably both are. Maybe I'll will one of them back to life.
That'd be sick. That'd be a move. I think isn't that like the anyway, we can do it later. And also with me is a guy who would never burn his house down, even if it was for the sake of not preventing World War III. Derek Schwarzinski. Derek, how you doing?
Yeah, I definitely not burned my house. I had my PC in my house.
We took the PC out, then maybe.
Potentially. Depends on if I have my headphones still in there too.
Okay. I think I would be willing to reimburse you for the headphones, for the sake of World War III, Derek. But
Oh, not the PC though?
that's a lot of money.
Fair enough.
Maybe we can start like a GoFundMe. But anyways, so let's get into these movies. I guess we'll start with the movie that we're kind of alluding to in The Sacrifice. It is like a 1986 movie. 1986 sounded right? Yeah, 1986 Swedish film directed by a Russian director, Andrei Tarkovsky. I think after he gets kicked out of Russia, it's his third and final movie. Like, he dies after. Yeah, it was his last movie. And it is about a guy who, in an attempt to prevent World War III, he gives up everything he owns. His house. He gives up his son. It's kind of hinted at that whole, you give up a son for it. So, yeah. Not a
Wait,
super
he gave up
narrative.
his son? What are you talking about?
Well, he says like, "I'll even give up a little man." I don't know.
Oh
Why he
yeah,
gave
but he
him that
doesn't.
voice.
Like he kind of goes in there with a gun, all creepy, but I don't think he actually does, right?
No, you
Oh
see a
no, because
little
you see
man.
Little Man at the end. But like, I think
Yeah.
I assumed he was just gonna leave him. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But Little Man causing World War III. Jeez Louise. Doesn't even have a name. You know what I'm saying? This
I kind of wondered if that was actually a reference to the atomic bomb little boy or whatever it was.
is that an atomic bomb?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it was the one of the first ones.
Yeah, I believe it was the second one dropped on Japan.
Well, let's make it into The Sacrifice. What were you guys' kind of like I guess more general thoughts on this movie?
I think that probably in contrast to some of our previous podcast episodes, especially with this one, we might have to kind of duke it out, not just on like interpretation, but in like figuring out what exactly was going on, because there's a lot of like uncertainty and being left up to the audience in this movie. For example, like you could take it as this nuclear holocaust really was happening, and by going to sleep with the witch Maria, he, prevents it, or it may have all been a dream, or, a few other different interpretations. So I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say in terms of like what actually happened.
I think considering he starts floating, it's pretty much like there's at least something kind of weird, supernatural going on. I don't think it's meant to be so much a dream. I think it's just supposed to be kind of about like what like terror and like nuclear anxiety causes in people that they resort to like pagan and heathen institutions, I suppose.
Yeah, to me, it definitely seems like. I mean, also, we don't know whether the World War III ends up happening, but it does seem like what he does is going to be in vain, right?
Hmm.
That was my interpretation.
Yeah, that's what I assumed the flashbacks, or not the flashbacks, but the flashes into like the like two
Future.
different shots of like one at the beginning of like the street strewn with trash, and then the people running through it like kind of like I don't know angry like a mob was supposed to be about. Not
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I think it was, yeah, it was like a mob.
Yeah, I thought that was supposed to be like alluding to something like apocalyptical stuff.
But then there's also like the one, also in the Shade of Trash, where like they're, maybe it's the same one, where they're kind of like running in opposite directions, right? Where it looks like more free. It's
Was it? I
interesting.
thought that there was one where there was no people. It was just the
Yeah.
streets filled with trash, and
Yeah,
then there
yeah,
was
that's what I
one
meant.
where people were running like a mob. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
Were they running
exactly.
like a mob? I don't know. It was like more like,
maybe like an escape or something. Is that what you're thinking of?
I was thinking it was kind of just like chaos. I don't know, like, like
Yeah, that's why.
that episode of It's Always Sunny where like Frank's showing them like the videos of like New Orleans, during Hurricane Katrina and how everyone's like stealing all the shit and stuff.
Yeah, that's why I
That's
felt
what
like it was
reminds me.
apocalyptical because it
Yeah,
felt like that. I thought it was like into the world after World War III kind of feeling.
yeah. So like, but also I think there's a lot of interpretation just in like, what the hell is this movie saying? You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah.
Because this more than like almost I don't want to say any other movie, but more than many other movies is like very, very intentional. You know, like in our first podcast, we watched Shining, which is a Kubrick movie, someone who's like known for his intention. And I don't even think that compares to the sacrifice with how careful Tarkovsky is with every single shot.
Hmm.
Um, I almost wonder if we can kind of should go through it with some sort of chronology, or should we kind of just attempt to kind of go through it scattered like we usually do.
I think it's kind of necessary, at least some chronology on this one.
Okay.
I also think though that there's basically like two or three like main issues we have to like nail down before we can make sense of anything. So like primarily if we take it as face value in terms of like everything that he said happened, or if we think that there's some sort of dream work or some sort of interpretive stuff going on.
I don't think it's so much dream work, but definitely like there's some deeper level thing going on between like whether or not these people are uh like actually experiencing these things because it's kind of weird how at the beginning it's all like perfect natural color, then all of a sudden it starts slowly turning into like black and white. I think that's I don't know if that's indicative of like just them being scared and like things becoming dire, or if it's just
Yeah, well, and then to kind of continue on that thought, it goes back to really nice colors again. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Which would
Well,
almost
after
suggest
he
after he does this whole big sacrifice. Well, I think it's after he wakes up, right? After he has sex with the witch
Yeah,
lady.
Well, isn't that the sacrifice? Because that's kind of the thing where there's like two different sacrifices, right? Because
Yeah.
Otto says that like if you go have sex with his witch, then we fix everything, right? Okay,
Mhm.
so he does that, and then he wakes up in his bed, and all the colors are back, and everyone seems normal, like there was no nuclear holocaust about to happen. But then he still goes about burning down the house, like he's not done sacrificing or something.
that's the interesting part is because he like promised to God, like he has that breakdown and like prays to God, and it's
Mhm.
like kind of him coming to his faith for like some kind of reinsurance, and and promises like his God that
It's
he's
like,
going.
burning his house is the backup plan, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Just in case, let me just get rid of everything I own.
Yeah.
Just to play on the safe side.
There's a lot
Yeah.
of like indications that all of this was a dream, right? Because like if you think about what happens when they're all kind of like watching the TV and all these alerts are going off, and then he pretty much things are going crazy with all the nuclear holocaust stuff, but there's still like pretty much a clear sense of what's real and like what the narrative is. And then he goes to take a nap, and that's when like things just start going bonkers. And so I'm pretty sure like my interpretation when I was watching it at least is that like it was all a dream. And then also when he goes and does his sacrifice by saying Maria, like immediately after he wakes up again. So it really fits nicely in this like idea of it being a dream.
But
Yeah,
see,
I
then
think
we
it's
also get multiple shots of Maria towards the end, right?
Hmm.
We have two, I think, where there's one where they kind of juxtapose kind of the family with the burning house, and then with Maria kind of also kind of on looking. And we also have, is that Maria on the bicycle at the end as well?
yeah.
I wasn't on asking on that one, but yeah. So that I think that lends credence to that it wasn't a dream. I didn't really see it
Hmm.
as a dream. I don't know. I guess I took it pretty literally, but maybe I'm just dummy.
I thought it was kind of like half and half kind of deal. Like it was mainly like an excuse for him, to commit adultery, or at least I think it was kind of maybe not him wanting to, but just I don't know, some weird voodoo stuff. Because apparently Maria is at least aware of what went down because she immediately like started showing like more affection than she did at the beginning to him because she cared enough to try and like save him from going to the crazy hospital.
Oh, in the like after he like woke up or whatever.
Yeah, and he burns down the house, and the people come and like take him away.
But she also definitely didn't seem familiar to him when he kind of like walks over and tries to take her hand. That's kind of like I think in my mind one of the reasons why it definitely seems like a dream because like what's particularly sacrificial about like going over to this woman's house and having sex with her? That doesn't seem like a sacrifice. That seems like some sort of like something you would do in a dream. That seems like a projection of your own desire in a way.
Yeah, but that's of his like primal heathen desire. But he's giving up his like Christian faith that tells him to be like a good boy and not commit adultery and stuff.
I mean,
And instead, he gives that up to go have sex with the heathen witch.
Hmm.
I
So
interpreted this
he's like
completely
sacrificed.
differently. I thought it was like in order for his sacrifice to be fulfilled, like God wasn't working out, so he like went to the witch, like almost like she was the one that could, like he would still have to make the deal with her, right?
Hmm.
And I don't know. So then, by having sex with her, that was kind of part one. That was kind of to win her approval so that he can go and enact this deal. But maybe I'm wrong.
Here's the other thing though, like she definitely doesn't ever acknowledge being a witch. The only person that says she's a witch is this like Otto guy who's at the very least kind of kooky and definitely into like supernatural and superstitious things. And then
Yeah.
he comes and he's like, "Yeah, you're a witch. Let's have sex so that we can prevent the apocalypse." She's like, "You know what?" And she only ever sleeps with him because he threatens to kill himself.
Yeah, but then they start floating in the air. So I think that was supposed to be like kind of like a nod to the fact that she's a witch.
For the record, for all the kids at home listening to this, please don't threaten to kill yourself to get to go to sleep with you. It's not nearly as reliable as this movie makes it out to be. What were you saying, Derek?
Well, I was just saying, them like when she starts like I guess gets on top of him and starts I don't know banging him. I don't know if that was or just like holding him.
Yeah, I don't think that's the original Swedish term, but yeah, I think we can go with the banging for now.
At the very least, like embracing him.
Hmm.
They start floating up into the air. So I think that was supposed to be like at least some kind of acknowledgement of her being a witch.
Yeah, I think it's tricky. And then there's also that thing in the beginning which kind of like sets
Yeah.
it kind of like bookends the movie with the boy planting the tree and like his process of like doing the same thing every day. Which like starts the movie where he's kind of like telling that like story, and then at the end where we see little boy like or little man or whatever going to water this tree. So I kind of like wonder what that has to say thematically.
We're also we're getting to its thematic significance. I'd like to talk about the narrative significance of that really quickly. So maybe
Uh-huh.
that can kind of help answer our question. Where we also have the other tree story, where Alexander tells Maria about. I didn't like write it all down. I was a bit confused about how his mom was dying and he wanted to plant a garden, like a tree for her.
Well, not a. What he did is he went. He already had a. She had a garden that was like untended like forever
Hmm.
and was overgrown, and he thought a nice thing to do would be clean it up and like you know weed it and etc. So he did that, and afterwards he realized that the thing he found special in it was how I guess the natural beauty of it.
Yeah, I think like to kind of springboard off that and kind of like get us into the thematic
Well, I was
things
just
of this
wait,
movie.
really quick. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to say
Okay,
that
yeah.
but then Maria stops to look at Little Man. Little Man working on the tree specifically, right?
Well, I
Which
think
to
that's at a
me,
different time.
no, it's at the very end. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So, but that to me, that's after he tells her the garden story.
yeah. After he gets taken away, and that's like at the end.
So I feel like maybe that lends credence to the fact that that was real. You know, because how would she know the significance of like trees? You know, and what it means to plant a tree with your dad or for your dad. Um, to
But
his family.
there wasn't any like specific mention of trees in the garden story. Like he mentions a garden and cleaning it up, but I don't feel like it has a ton to do with like planting a tree. Because the whole thing about like cleaning up the garden is basically like imposing civilization and human order onto
Yeah,
nature, which
to
is like
nature.
basically a no-no. Whereas I don't feel like that's necessarily the same like moral as the watering the tree.
That's more about structure, right? So I guess we can get into that. Once we're talking about this
Yeah,
tree, walk us through this
because
scene, Caleb.
that's interesting too. Oh, through the final scene?
Or this first scene. Yeah. The first.
Okay, so basically it's the opening shot, and it is basically Alexander telling his son, well, the whole first probably like 10 minutes is basically just this long philosophical ramble monologue, basically, because his son can't talk. And he's basically talking about how there's probably something really special and important about like watering a tree every day and having that kind of like structure in your life. And he recounts some tale, I think, of some monk or some such that like does the same thing and waters a tree every
Mhm.
day. And I guess the idea is that there's some sort of magic in that structure. But this is very interesting to me because this is a movie that I definitely didn't get a lot of it, or at least there's a lot of it that's up to interpretation and I can't nail down as being certain. But if there's like one thing that's absolutely the takeaway from this movie, it's that civilization and society are bad. And this is strange because the scene that bookends our movie has this sort of fond attitude towards like order and doing the same
Yeah.
thing every day. Every other of the movie, like even in the way that it's shot, is basically telling us that civilization's bad. So like if you look at basically, I think the only two happy parts of the movie are like the very beginning and the very end. And the end sort of like bittersweet, but I
Yeah,
think like
it's really happy.
as he's being well, I wouldn't say it's happy, but I think
Mhm.
like it's really sad. But as he's being taken away, you see the shot of the sun like watering the tree, and that's kind of like I don't know. It like takes you home. It's like okay, I can't
But
explain it, but it definitely like feels good. And that's like the two good feeling movies are with this order, but everything else about this movie is saying that order is bad, even the way that it's shot. So if you look at the countryside, like it's desolate. There's no buildings or people at all for like the beginning of the whole movie, except for like the one little cabin in the back. But there's very little civilization. It's just like this one family. And the whole idea is that this nuclear holocaust is like the result of man's hubris or something,
Mhm.
and the downfall of civilization and all that. So it's like two conflicting sort of ideologies, and I can't quite shake them out.
Yeah, I mean, he even says that. There's a quote where if you follow, I don't think this is a direct quote, but if you follow habit, the world could change, right? There's potential to change the world there. He thinks.
Uh-huh.
He says that at the beginning to his son. Um, which yeah, it's kind of weird that for him he says that, but the way he tries to change the world is by doing something extremely spontaneous, and that can only be done one time, right? You can only burn your house down once.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's two things that you said that I wanted to address, Caleb. You said how it was like the happiness was at the end and the beginning and the end, like where he's talking about like there's involving things like order and whatnot in civilization. And I think that was kind of interesting because the colors of the film, like at the beginning and the end, are the only time when there's like real color. And the middle part is like where you see like Otto and like telling him like go bang the witch to save us. And that's when he's like, I'm gonna go do this chaotic, crazy thing, try and save us.
He's so chaotic good, it's nuts. Chaotic good at his
also,
soul.
So it's kind of like the fading of color when he's talking about like also to specifically Maria, I think the personification of like heathen and like obviously witchcraft and whatnot, natural order things kind of in the classical sense is when like there's no color and those aren't exactly happy moments.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the other thing that we have to factor into this is like how civilization is sort of like portrayed as being despicable in terms of the sound. So like the TV brings the news of the Holocaust, like the nuclear Holocaust, and then when those jets fly over, it's such a jarring sound compared to like everything that we've sort of like got ourselves used to with the rest of this movie. These like roaring jet sound just seems so synthetic and foreign and gross. That was like just like another way, I guess, that civilization and technology are like frowned upon. But it's like really contradictory. I'm
It's also
confused.
interesting how like the frame is dictated by sound, right? Where usually we see sound follow the frame, So if like um we like let's say like you have two characters talking, it will cut to the character and then we'll see them talk, you know? But in the sacrifice, we'll have, a character in this beautiful frame, and then someone will maybe walk off screen or something and they'll start talking, and then the frame will slowly pan to that person, right? Where sound also dictates, I guess, action in the sense of, kind of the filmic eye sort of perspective.
I think especially if we're talking about like shots and cinematography in general, there's like so much to dig into with regards to the sacrifice, because I think that was probably my favorite part of the whole movie. The way that they would have like typically like these incredibly long shots that would be like slow moving the entire time.
Yeah.
And what would happen is that throughout the movie, you would have a space like the living room, and over the like typically in a movie, every time a certain space is portrayed, it'll be from one or two angles. In this movie, the camera would like almost spin around the whole movie, so you would see the space from every different kind of angle, and it was like you were really living in it. It was very interesting.
Also about how you said it would like spin around. I noticed like the interesting shots, like at the beginning, they would just set up like what they did throughout like all the beginning and the end. I noticed is that they'd set a location for the camera and sit it there, and the characters would kind of move into it, or the camera would rotate. Like, unless, and the only time it broke that at the beginning was when their the father, what's his name, Alexander, he was like doing his monologue to Little Man, and it just kind of slowly zooms in until you lose sight of Little Man, until Little Man just jumps into frame.
Oh yeah.
But then throughout the middle, it was less, rotation and more close zooms. I thought that was interesting. There's some kind of dichotomy going on there.
Especially with like people coming in and out of the frame. I also noticed that like sometimes the camera would be like centered on the action, and then some other characters would just kind of like walk in the way, like and obstruct your view of what was happening. And just like the way I don't know, like really felt like they were like living in this space. They wouldn't like respect the point of view of the camera really. They would just kind of like move around, and it felt very like natural.
It's really funny because um, I'm not going to get too much Dreyer right now, but Dreyer, the director, the movie he's most famous for is The Passion of Joan of Arc, which is very, very famous for its panning of camera and kind of this constantly moving out. It does it well. Like the opposite, where it's all about the face, and this is definitely all about the space. I guess, right? Nice little rhyme. And then even just to contrast the sacrifice of Day of Wrath, right? Where like Day of Wrath it's always central framing,
Uh-huh.
Literally every single shot, there's a character in the middle. I would say for
Yeah.
like 90% of shots. And yeah, the sacrifice, it's really breaks convention in that manner. It was just a really strange contrast.
Yeah, I agree. As a kind of like side note, I think it's very funny that both of these movies happen to be about a witch.
Yeah. A lot of witches. A lot of deals with, God slash the devil.
Actually, I read somewhere that his Tarkovsky's working title for the sacrifice was called The Witch.
Really?
Uh-huh.
That's so sick. Yeah, and also with Faust, and man, we have too many deals with the devil going on lately.
Yeah.
But maybe we can keep going through chronologically. So yeah, so we have this. We were talking about these beautiful shots at the beginning. We kind of have this guy on the bike who comes, and they talk about the hopelessness of life, which really happy scene. But it is beautiful though, right?
And it is the happiest of the whole movie.
Yeah. um, and kind of to go to your point about citing defective, they literally have a quote that our culture is defective.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And that the material is growing faster than the spiritual.
Yep.
And also one quote that I think really informs me in the scene is I don't actually know if it's the guy on the bike that says it or if it's Alexander that says it, but one of them says, "Only if someone could stop talking and do something instead," which really seems to inform what Alexander does throughout the movie. And I think about this movie is there's so much to unpack. Like every single quote seems so important. Insane.
Yeah, I thought that that quote in particular was I wrote that down. I thought that was very interesting because it's clear that a lot of this movie is sort of autobiographical in nature, especially with just like the sort of like very like upfront talking about philosophy. Like they don't always leave philosophy to be just a thematic thing, but they'll openly talk about it. And so I think a lot of this to me feels like very personal to Tarkovsky, and I kind of wonder if that like sense of we have to do and not talk about is sort of like maybe indicative of the frustrations of an artist. In that like an artist or a philosopher or any kind of thinker that a director or Alexander himself might be spends a lot of their time talking about ideas and talking about things and very little time doing. So I kind of wonder if that was sort of a reflection on Tarkovsky's own
I think that's
frustrations, maybe.
a great interpretation, and that kind of goes really interesting to some of the observations I made. Like I said, just about kind of the sound versus the frame, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the frame is doing, the frame is action, and a lot of the time, we kind of have Tarkovsky's claiming that although in film we may depict action superseding sound, in reality, sound supersedes action.
Mm-hmm.
I think is what he's saying, and there is a frustration in that, and there's a frustration watching it too, right? Like you hear characters talking, and you're like, "Who the hell is talking?"
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting point. I think it does kind of make things come together.
Yeah, I think in terms of like, I feel like the sacrifice in general like takes you on a very interesting path, and I think like emotionally, I found fairly engaging. Like, you really do feel like a profound sense of dread throughout the entire big middle chunk of the movie, and then you kind of get that like little perk up at the end with little man wanting the thing. Like emotionally, I thought that was very powerful. But in terms of the narrative, I still like. I was kind of wondering if maybe we would all get together and like we would kind of be able to like work through it. But I don't know. I think this might be. I don't know if I'm gonna get it. I feel
Yeah, I
like
think
in
it's
terms of the
definitely a
narrative,
twofer.
yeah.
Can't watch it once. Is there
And
any
I don't
other
know, like,
scenes that you guys think are really important through the beginning?
let's see. I noticed that just something interesting to note is that Maria she jims the camera at one point for a very protracted scene, which I always think is interesting when directors have their characters stare directly into the camera. And I think it's like it happens before Maria becomes such a central character, so it's kind of like a cool bit of foreshadowing.
Yeah, both movies had a lot of looks to the camera. I think it's especially interesting, and this kind of ties into the conversation that we had last episode, where we talked about Chaplin and the kind of look to the camera and how that relates to the Holocaust. Well, now we have literally a new movie, maybe not the next Holocaust, but about the next World War, right? Nuclear Holocaust.
Yeah.
And we get a lot of looks to the camera. And I have to think that's a bit intentional.
Yeah, I thought about that too, the fact that this movie is very like specific to a time and a place too. And I think that maybe if some of this movie doesn't quite thematically like slap us across the face as much, it might very well be that it's for a different time because it's so specific to that kind of fear of nuclear war that we don't really have anymore. And I think you can see this in like a lot of media from that time, that like just that constant dread of nuclear war. And so I kind of wonder if maybe some of that is like lost on our generation, that we just don't comprehend that fear.
I kind of comprehend it these days. I don't know. I mean, isn't this the closest the nuclear clock? What's it called? The clock?
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, I
the
know what you're talking about.
The
Doomsday
apocalypse.
Clock.
What'd you say, Eric?
Doomsday Clock.
Doomsday
Or
clock.
whatever.
Yeah. Isn't this the closest the doomsday clock's ever been?
I don't know,
Midnight.
but
Yeah, supposedly,
I think we're just
I don't know. I still don't feel like it's nearly as big as a fear
yeah.
as it was back in that time.
But I do think that these shots of, especially that shot of Maria, where it's her in this empty space and she's not too close to the camera, she's far back, right?
Mhm.
And also in the scene, she's pretty far back, towards the back of the room. I think it definitely recalls the Holocaust images. I think it's Tarkovsky, almost very directly saying like, this is gonna happen again. This is what you want to happen, Remember how
Yeah,
shocked we were at the Holocaust? You want a nuclear Holocaust. Be
yeah,
ridiculous. And she's also in the room that she's in that scene, in that shot. It's like super empty, like
yeah,
she is the focus, and oh my gosh, it gets to me.
yeah. I think like yeah, I do think that fear of nuclear war and like that new Holocaust has to be part of the thematic anti-civilization. But because of the things we spoke about previously with like the watering the tree and how that is kind of like the only time of solace in the movie,
Mhm.
perhaps like the theme of this could be summarized as something like anti-civilization pro-order, like anti-societal order but pro-personal order or something. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think that's interesting. I'm trying to think. Do you have any particular evidence? Obviously, we have the beginning and the end, right? That are talking about personal order, but maybe throughout the rest, or because really, the beginning talks about personal order.
I figured that was like the significance of like I don't know, the scene where he starts praying was seemed to be like a big deal for that, for like it being like Christianity being order and like this the like I don't know, natural order and like I guess or natural world of that Maria's from being I don't know in like contrast or conflict of some kind.
Well, it's not necessarily. Is it necessarily a Christian God? Do we know that for sure? Like, obviously
I
most
mean,
likely
he's
is a Christian
praying
God.
to. He quotes Bible, and the little man at the end quotes. Forget the book,
Yeah.
but he quotes like probably a passage, some kind. I forget which.
Yeah, it's something about speaking. I wish I remembered. It's in the beginning was the word.
Yeah, Gospel of John.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
there
I
was.
think like.
Yeah,
Sorry,
you
go
can
ahead.
go. You go for it.
I was just gonna say that you kind of asked like for any kind of like direct evidence
Mhm.
for like promoting that like personal order thing besides the beginning and the end. And I think that pretty much I didn't really get any, but I think that the movie does this very interesting thing on its emotional roller coaster where like the beginning and final scenes seem like such a different world than the whole middle. Um, which kind of to me like is what made it feel particularly dreamlike in that the beginning and end were like awake and the middle was asleep. Um, but like I really feel like they, and just in terms of their feeling, they're so different, so distinct.
I agree that there's distinct feelings, though I do think there is some evidence, and I actually found something on my notes. Um, there's this discussion, I guess, towards the middle-ish, like beginning slash middle-ish of the movie. We're talking about truth. Um, there's like an analogy that I didn't quite understand, but a cockroach moving around a plate, and I guess maybe that it thinks the world's. I didn't understand that exactly, but there's a line that we are blind, we see nothing, right?
Mhm.
And that basically what they're saying is that with this cockroach and the plate thing, I didn't quite understand the analogy, but I think the idea was that the only truth you have is your own personal truth, right?
Uh-huh.
Because to the cockroach, all that matters is going around that plate, and that is its truth. And why does it matter if the world's exploding if it can keep going around the plate? And I think
Hmm.
maybe it's less about um, and yeah, I guess yeah. So it is about your own order versus societal order. I think it almost goes in congress with his action, right? It's so ludicrous and almost blasphemous that one man can save the world by burning his house, right?
Yeah.
Your actions affect you. Then this is
Yeah.
what Tarkovsky's saying, right?
Uh-huh.
That your actions affect you. They don't affect, whoever.
Hmm.
And that's why it's just so silly that, the sacrifice he makes, the only sacrifice you can make is a sacrifice, for yourself and the people very directly around you. But what he's doing, he's putting all that in jeopardy.
Yeah, I kind of also wonder if maybe the confused sort of themes and the perhaps like contradictory themes of this movie are, like we said before, like very intentional, because it sort of is about like a post, like this is definitely a very postmodern movie. I think that it's kind of about that like postmodern confusion and search for meaning as well. Like it's not immediately clear what the correct path is, and there's a lot of conflicting ideas and ideologies that we have to consider. And so maybe like our confusion upon trying to analyze this movie is intentional because it represents, the confusion that Alexander himself and everybody faces.
Yeah, and also the frustration with like, why trying to find out these things while also like constantly having to make decisions, right?
Yeah.
To constantly have to be doing things, right? Once
Hmm.
again, go back this whole, like talking, the sound versus the frame, right? Where as much as you want to talk, you still got to put your frame somewhere, right? You still have to be
Yeah.
doing something. And this is every character kind of says this. I think even or no, even I think it's his wife. What's his wife's name? His wife Adelaide.
Yeah.
Yeah, who says that you know, don't touch me when she's on her like tirade where she's like super pissed off at him. She's like, don't touch me,
Hmm.
do something, you men. Why can't you say something? Like this frustration with
Hmm.
she can't do anything, but why don't others?
Yeah.
I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think I don't know. What about you, Derek? Do you think you have anything to kind of like refine this general thematic idea we have? Like if we have to like wrap this whole movie up into a sentence or two?
I thought you said there was a confusion in thematic, theme or the themes of order and chaos and whatnot. I think there's also an intentional confusion on whether or not this is real or not. Because
Yeah.
at the very beginning, Otto talks about how he wants to feel something real. I feel like that's mirrored in like Alexander, potentially dreaming this whole idea.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like this movie is supposed to just be kind of the audience figuring things out for themselves in like kind of way. This is kind of like, I guess, a spiritual guide to finding what's real and what side you lie on, chaos or order, whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's definitely true. I think maybe it might be a good time to move on to Day of Wrath.
Yes, perhaps a complete opposite in terms of like what kind of movie it is, I think, in a lot of ways.
Well, I think they have some similarities, right? And they both are definitely not narrative based, right?
Do you think? I kind of think that, to me at least, I kind of thought of The Day of Wrath as being a complete narrative drama.
I don't know. Derek, where are you standing on this?
I kind of agree with Caleb. I felt like it, even thematically, I felt that like sacrifice was like intentional confusing. I think this is definitely there's a strict sense of theme here. Yeah. So I definitely can see
Yeah, sure, but I
this
still
being
wouldn't
like
say it's
complete
necessarily.
opposite.
So actually, that last part again, I interrupted you. Could you say that last part again, Derek?
I could definitely see these being complete opposites. So I'm kind of with Caleb on this.
I think, like, for me, a lot of the drama comes from, what is actually happening. Like, there's not a lot of confusion about what's really going on here. To me, the movie almost felt like if this movie's anything, it's a drama. It's all about, like, oh my god, that just happened. Like, you won't believe what happened next kind of thing.
I mean,
Yeah.
It's very, like, it's like juicy.
but is that true? What's like the big oh my god that just happened scenes outside of the very end, where
I
he
mean,
dies?
His the young wife, banging the young stepson,
Yeah.
in 1940.
Yeah, that's pretty risque.
Yeah, but we don't actually see like the moment, do we?
I mean, we kind of do. They're kind of like tussling in the grass.
No, I'm saying we don't see
Yeah,
like.
that's the 1946 sex scene, dude.
It seems that we don't really see like them, like we see them kiss, but is it ever indicated if that's their first kiss? I
I
always
think-
assumed like this is something that's been going on, right? Because it seems like it seemed too natural for them to kiss when we do see
Well,
them kiss.
it's supposed to be like insinuated like towards the beginning that once she's like, okay, I might be jumping ahead, but like at the beginning she's like, wearing full habit and whatnot. Then once she like confirms her affections with the young boy, she starts slowly like wearing less and less of her habit. I felt like that was kind of a clue that she's slowly like, I don't know, getting more and more into and like I guess making out and banging him.
Yeah, I agree. My point is that it's not about the moment of like, oh my gosh, that's their first kiss. You know what I mean?
I don't think that matters. I don't think. Maybe you might be misunderstanding my point. It's not that it's like oh my god, that just happened, like a discrete moment, but it's like, oh my god, this is actually happening. Like,
Yeah.
to me, the impact isn't in like the exact moment that it happens, but just the narrative twists and turns that it takes. But I do have to say, if there was one moment where I thought like my jaw actually hit the floor, and it actually didn't get developed that much, but it's where she's doing some sort of like stitching or sewing or I don't know, but she's basically working on some sort of cloth, and it kind of like pans to what it is, and it's like a young, almost nude woman with like a child, and it's like, oh my god, this girl's pregnant, holy crap. So that
Dude,
was like the one like oh moment for me.
Anne is fucking scary. But really quick,
Yeah.
we kind of jumped the gun a bit just in terms of like what the actual movie is. For those of you who haven't seen Day of Wrath, which is almost impossible to find, by the way, um, Day of Wrath is about this. Well, it's hard to say who's actually the main character. It's about this guy, Reverend Absalom Pedersen, who marries this or forces this very young woman and Peter's daughter to marry her, basically by her mom gets accused of witchcraft, and he saves the mom. Thus, she has to marry him, and she cheats on him with his son Martin, who is also I say he's also in the clergy somehow. Is that true, or is he just like a religious man? I was unclear about that.
I thought he was in the clergy as well, but that may be incorrect.
I
I thought
assumed
it was assumed that he was going to take after his father.
Yeah, that's what I figured. And then we have his the Reverend's mother Moret, who hates Anne. She sees through her pretty quickly. And then we also kind of have this B plot of this old woman Mart, who gets accused of witchcraft, and she begs the Reverend to save her life, and he does not do so.
It's interesting that you call it the B plot because it's the first major plot that like happens before any of the other stuff, even if it might be like less significant in terms of length. It definitely like sets up all of the next action, so it's super
Yeah,
like
sure.
necessary.
No, it is.
Like I would
I'm
say
not
it's
saying
just as
like,
necessary.
Yeah, I would agree.
I think that was also like another like such juicy drama in this movie where like he doesn't spare the um let me look up her name. The woman who first gets accused of being a
Martha.
witch.
Martha.
Martha or something.
Martha,
Yeah,
yeah.
Martha.
Just for the audience's sake, we have Martin, Moret, Mart, Maria, and Marta between the two movies. So forgive us if we're not always right there with the character names.
What was I gonna say? Yeah, but that was another juicy thing. And I think like for me when I first watched this movie, I felt pretty bad for Absalom and kind of thought that he was this holy sanctimonious man and all that sort of stuff. But then when I kind of like reflected on it a little bit, he's pretty messed up. He basically like is motivated by his dick in a lot of ways because he absolutely didn't care to save this old ragged woman who's gonna be burned, but he definitely was down to save a person who's being accused if that person has a hot daughter. So he's equally as messed up as, well, maybe not equally, but he's still messed up.
The thing is, though, also, he does feel bad. Well, it's insinuated that he feels like really bad afterwards, but again, it's after she dies, so
Who cares?
he still does let her die.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and it's not like he feels bad, but it's not necessarily regret. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not convinced that, she comes back to life and, gets accused again, that he's not doing the exact same thing.
yeah,
I think to me that kind of first act is super important to me, and this might just be specific to my interpretation. But to me, one of the coolest things about this movie is that like obviously like witchcraft isn't explicitly like real, but all of the curses that people put on people come true.
Mhm.
So like there is this sense that like it might not be witchcraft, it might be the hand of God or fate or something, but like or just coincidence. But it is interesting that all of the things that these witches are purported to be able to do actually do happen.
It's super sick.
I thought it was kind of also insinuated in like, I'm gonna go back to this a lot, but like, I felt it was important that Anne was like losing some of her like headgear habit that felt very irreligious. I suppose. I felt that was like her becoming a witch slowly. Through like I guess doing something unholy like adultery.
It begs this question, right, of kind of this chicken or the egg in terms of the witch thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
are these women witches because that's how they were born, or are these women witches because that's kind of what society molds them into being? Right? It's not chicken or
Exactly.
the egg. It's more
Exactly.
like nature versus nurture. Just witch nature versus nurture. Also, yeah,
Yeah, but I
shout
think
outs to the old lady side boob, by the way. That was real nice. Got plenty of that in this movie. So
Yeah,
thanks, Dreyer.
definitely a big fan of that.
Yeah, so much. Do you think this
but I
movie
think
do
that
that?
is
Like, we're not supposed to like that, right? Like, Dreyer must
No,
know that, like, that's.
it was probably just for his taste. He
It's
needed a
like
little something just to keep him going throughout the shoot.
Tarantino likes feet and Dreyer just raging for old lady side boob. Like, that's what keeps him going. What were you gonna
Yeah, I
say,
think that
Caleb?
was like the perfect way to summarize like what I was saying earlier is that like it's unclear whether these people actually are witches or if society has made them into witches.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I think there's a lot of what Dreyer does with his technique that needs to be examined, like how it affects the narrative. Like his framing, like I kind of mentioned this when we were talking about sacrifice, is always so specific, you know, where their character is almost always in the middle. Or if there's two characters, which honestly there really is, in a shot, they're one's on one side, one's on the other, perfectly symmetrical. I'm not sure
Hmm.
why he does it, but I'm curious if you guys have any ideas.
It could be just a sense of like a type of style, like a kind of a more formal and discreet setup. I think it also, the one particular example I have is when it is able to suit the mood exceptionally well. So, like, if you kind of look at these two different cases, one where Martin first comes home and he meets Anne, and then the other cases where he comes home, Martin comes home and like meets his grandma or something like that. I think it's who it was. And like in one, the scene just flows so naturally when he meets his grandma. It just like I don't know if this is. I think it was partially the way like the scene was set up from a cinematographer's perspective, and partially just like really good writing. But it just seems so natural in comparison to the scene where he meets Anne, which came just a few moments earlier, which just like seems so unnatural and awkward that like I don't know. There was like sexual tension going from like the
Yeah.
first minute.
Yeah, let's look back at those scenes and see like what exactly Dreyer does. Because, but I also on my quick 2 minute reflection while you were talking, I think part of the reason might be because all of these characters are getting examined by us, right? Okay, we talked about it
Yeah.
earlier where initially you want to just like Anne, but you also kind of want to dislike Reverend Absalom. But also I kind of want to dislike Martin because like he sort of turns on his dad and is in general just like a really like annoying sad boy. And
Yeah, and he
then
Mhm.
can't decide whether or not to side with Anne at the end, and
yeah,
instead just like lets her, go on her own basically. It was kind of, a douchebag thing after, like, I guess insinuated that she's pregnant from him.
and then we also have Moret, right, who is like equally like why is she being such an asshole to Anne? Right?
Mhm.
Like it's from minute one where
Yeah.
she's just like throwing shade like it's nobody's business. So none of these characters are particularly likable, and they're all examinable. And it's even more interesting when we do have these shots of two characters. Like the one that pops in my mind first is there's like a scene where it's Martin and Martin Martin and Moret at the table. The son and the grandmother, or I guess the son and the mother. Both at each of the table, and they're kind of just talking about their ideology. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I think like this is definitely like has a lot of focus on the characters, but kind of like what I was saying before with like none of the characters being likable, like this is such like a soap opera. I don't mean that in a bad way, but just in like everybody's like not a good character and not a bad character, and it's just so dramatic. And I love it. It's super entertaining. But yeah, everybody's pretty fucked up and does some really and weird and nasty things. But it's interesting because in the end, Anne ends up essentially turning herself in. Like the minister sort of gives the vibe that if she like attests that she's innocent on this guy's coffin, then she's gonna be okay. But I guess she like folds into her guilt, which is interesting to me.
Well, actually, I think my dad, he actually, as you guys know, maybe I don't does not know, he's a history professor, and he very explicitly covers like Scotland and the South Carolina relationship. There's a lot of witch trials going on there. I remember he told me that one thing, actually, the thing that kind of got him into this whole branch study is that this case about this woman who kills her husband supposedly, and to see if she's lying, they make her put her hand on either his corpse or his coffin. I think it must be his corpse. And if it starts bleeding, then it's said to be that she is the one that killed him. That's
Hmm.
kind of what I thought it was. I thought it was because they make him open the coffin. So I think
Yeah.
maybe it's less her guilt, and maybe she knows that she's going to get caught.
Do you think she would have got caught if she lied?
Well, I think obviously like this is people don't start bleeding after death, but I don't know if she necessarily knows that.
That's true. That's true. I think another thing that I kind of thought was one of the weaker points of this movie uh, is that there was very little like context to what was going on, or like we really don't have much of a feeling for like what their community is and like how common are witch trials around here, and has this been like a recent plight of witch trials, or I don't know, maybe it's just something that like the audience back in the 40s would have known, but I kind of doubt it. To me, I was sort of lost in terms of like the scale and context of all this stuff.
I'm so a bit confused. How do you mean? Like how big the witch trials were?
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
I mean,
exactly. Like, is
also
this
how
like an
many?
isolated event that like it's just? I mean, because it seems like there's been a lot of witch trials going on with like Anne's mother, Anne herself, and Marta
Marta.
or Marette or no, it's
Mar-
Marta. Uh,
yeah, it's like Marte, Marta.
Yeah, but like I was just like maybe this is just me being dumb and not knowing the historical context, but I didn't realize that like this was so common. And is this supposed to be something that's common?
Maybe I can check real quick. Witch trials. Where does it take place again? It
I
takes
mean,
place.
there's one point I know in like Europe where there were like a lot of witch trials, like a
Yeah,
ridiculous,
no,
and those
Europe
like
witch trials were definitely a thing.
yeah, and they were like we're talking like huge amounts.
I guess my conception was that there was specific like times and places where they happened in large frequency, but didn't happen that much besides that.
So it looks like there was the Wurzburg witch trials, which took place in Germany in the 1600s.
And I believe this is supposed to be around that.
Yeah, this was definitely. I can't. I man, I wish I wrote down the year. There was a letter where they give a year, the exact year.
This is in 1623.
Okay, so yeah, these
Is
Jewish
day
trials
of
took
rest.
place from 1626 to 1631.
Okay, so that must be the general.
Yeah.
Hmm. But yeah, I think like to me, I don't think that like this is necessarily something that like a lot of people know. So I feel like leaving out the context made it a little bit confusing and like disconnected for me. Like
Hmm. Maybe, but like, okay, imagine if it was like in Salem, right? Like,
yeah,
we
that would have
would.
made sense because that's something that like I have the and I would feel like most Americans
Most
have the
Americans.
historical context for it. So do you think that the viewers of this movie I would have had that context?
I think so because I mean, assuming I'm assuming because this is in German, they would know that the Nuremberg trials were a thing. I think they're kind of like that for you know the German people.
That makes sense. I hadn't really considered that.
At least I assume because I assume this is kind of like their Salem witch trial.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
assume that. I think it's okay to assume. And also, apparently, As I'm doing my research into these Danish witch trials, they're the big witch of the time, the hottest witch around was actually named Anna Coldings, nicknamed Anne. So man, I really should have done my research beforehand, but yeah, so
These are some revelations.
yeah, so the big Danish witch was Anne. So I mean, there's plus some intertextuality in that as well, which is kind of cool, actually.
Yeah, apparently this is actually based on real life because this movie was based on a play, which was based on an incident from 1590 when Anne Peter's daughter, the widow of priest Absalon Peterson Dreyer, was accused of witchcraft and burned alive in the city of Bergen. So I'm sure they add a lot of stuff like in the um, historical thing. I don't know if they mention that much about like all the family drama, but it is based on real life, so that's pretty cool. I didn't realize that. I knew it was based on a play, but I didn't realize it was based on real life.
Mm-hmm. I didn't realize either. Yeah. Well, so there goes that complaint, Caleb.
Yeah, right.
Over.
It's perfect now. The movie's perfect.
No flaws. Derek, give any other thoughts on Day of Wrath?
Yeah, I got kind of bored, to be honest.
You thought it was what?
I thought, I don't know, it's kind of too dry for me. It's kind of like, there was nothing that interested me too much, to be honest.
I thought his lighting was really good. Because, like, the places where he's at, like, he puts in windows in places, like, it's not easy to, like, always have these characters' faces lit up. You know, if we think back to Faust, like, it's obviously a great play, but, like, there's some pretty unnatural lighting in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's people's cup of tea. I don't love it as much, right? When I dig the vibe a bit, you know, where it's just like it's like very plastered on light and like this very dark shadowy background. This movie has the dark shadowy backgrounds, but the lighting to me was extremely natural, which is even more impressive because much like Faust, which you know, there's definitely a connection there with Dreyer and Murnau. It's extremely focused on the face, right? This movie is all about the face. Once again, all about examining. We're always seeing face, and these faces are always lit up. So I think that's impressive.
I think I kind of can see where you're coming from, Derek. I think that like I wouldn't go so far as to call it boring, but I think there was like because I think there was a lot of things that more like the drama was just super juicy and I thought was pretty compelling. But I do agree that in a lot of ways, kind of like what we said before, but there not being that many sympathetic characters. I feel like beyond like the kind of compelled to watch the train wreck drama kind of vibe, there wasn't like that much emotional connection.
Yeah,
like I don't really care about these people. I don't care if Anne dies that much. I don't really care if any of these people die or what happens to them because none of them are that sympathetic. So I'm only interested in watching them because of the train wreck of their lives, basically. It's like reality TV or something.
Yeah, I got kind of the Great Gatsby syndrome, right? We're like,
Mhm.
yeah, it's well done, and you know the narrative's good, but god damn, these characters are like not very sympathetic.
Yeah.
I do think that ending scene is super. Not the ending scene, like I guess the scene where Reverend Absalom dies is super compelling. That was by far the most compelling part to me. Where she's like, you know what? I always hated you. You were the worst. I've hated you always, and now I love you even less now that I'm banging your son.
Exactly.
I'm like, what?
Exactly. That's like that just like totally sums up the whole movie. Just like that sordid, like,
Yeah.
now that I'm banging your son. Oh.
But dude, it was so fire, and then he just dies. She just does.
You didn't take the heat.
She does it to him. The man could not take the heat to save his life.
Oh, Lord.
Burning witches, but couldn't take the fire for a minute.
Yep, exactly.
Gosh.
Yeah, I love that of this movie. That like unabashed just drama. It's pretty cool.
And they do it well. Like all of these actors do a really good job, especially Anne.
Oh,
Her
for sure. Yeah.
Like, that's probably like the one thing I enjoyed is that the acting felt like pretty like I noticed. Okay, I'm gonna be a little nitpicky. The scene where in the sacrifice where Adelaide's like freaking out felt like way too much for too little.
Yep.
I was
Yeah,
like, what's going on here? Come on.
especially because it's a character that we don't necessarily care about.
Yeah, so I was thrown off by that, but so it was kind of nice in Days of Wrath. It was like, okay, I can see where everyone's coming from, except for this one like grandmother lady who's just like being a bitch for being a bitch.
But even then, you can see like what her deal is, right? Like
Yeah,
when she
you can
talks
see
about
that.
how she's always loved the father, and that's like third person on Earth, and then it kind of contextualizes her actions a bit more.
Yeah,
I think that final scene too, where Absalom dies, is like super important because it kind of flips the narrative on him. Whereas I think like up to this point, I would say most of the audience would feel pretty sympathetic towards Absalom about like, oh man, poor guy, he's getting cucked by his own son. And then at
Yeah,
that point, you kind of start to see like, oh wait, this guy's actually kind of an asshole too. Um, so I don't know. It kind of like flips the narrative on him, and it kind of shows you that's like the moment where you really realize like, oh wait, no one's clean in this. This is everybody's pretty messed up.
and I think like one thing that can't be understated is how understated, you know, Elizabeth Moven's portrayal of Anne is at first, right? Because when we have this character who's delivering this speech, like, you know, I've never loved you, etc., etc. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's so easy for that to come off as cliche, right? Like, oh, we get
Mm-hmm.
the quiet character, and then she feels all this tension, and then she just explodes. But she does
Yeah.
such a great job of building up, and like
Mm-hmm.
those moments she has with Martin, the son, where it's like you kind of get to see, oh, this is the real me, and like how genuinely happy she seems, and then
Yeah.
just how genuinely changed she seems, and the sacrifices. To quote the sacrifice, if I can find this, I say I'm going to quote it, and I don't have it. I don't know. They had something about being chained by their own life or something.
Yeah. I think also to like kind of combine with that like transition and that skill as an actor to what we were saying before about how these witches are kind of being made by their society. There's that line pretty early on where they someone is condemning Anne. I can't remember who, but they're basically saying like, or no, it's like they're talking about her mother and how her mother had like this fire in her eyes or whatever, and how she's probably going to be the same or something like that. And at that point in the movie, you're like, man, what the hell? Like, it seems like it's coming out of nowhere. Like, this is like just this relatively innocent, young woman, and then like over the course of the movie, you see the fire come out, and I think that that's like, I don't know, it's this nice bridge between like that skill that she has as an actress to be able to pull that off convincingly, and also it fits perfectly with the narrative of, you know, the society makes the witches basically.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like, and it all comes on the heels of her acting. I don't think any of that would be possible without it.
Yeah.
We have any other thoughts on either the Day of Wrath or the Sacrifice? I feel like, especially with the Sacrifice, there's a couple more things we could probably mention, but I'm curious what you guys have to think.
um, the I thought something cool was that the scene after Alexander's praying to like save him and whatnot, he'll give up his little men even and stuff like that. Where Julia, or not Julia, but the daughter, she she's like, you don't see her, and then she starts talking, and then she says, "Help me, come here, Victor," and the camera pans to her, and then it pans back after she leaves frame until like backwards until you can see her in the mirror naked behind the shade, and you
That was so
realize
good.
that, and you see, and that's like Victor looking at that, and you realize, and then just she comes forward towards Victor, you assuming it's Victor because she just said, "Come here, Victor," you realize kind of just what happened, and then it cuts away. And then I thought that was really cool. I thought that was kind of perfect setup for that.
Yeah, no, his shot comp is, well, I guess not a shot composition, but like his, yeah, I guess like his mise en scène is just so clean throughout everything, and like cinematography is just so clean. It's insane. Like,
I was actually gonna. Oh, sorry.
there you go, go.
That to kind of like piggyback off of that. One of the last things I had to say about the movie was another really great shot where it's when Alexander goes to Maria's house, um, and they're sort of like building up to this like sexual act, and it has a great scene where it's very dark and you can kind of only barely make them out, and they kind of like are standing in front of one another to where their silhouettes are like blending together. And I think they might be hugging, but they might just be like standing at a kind of weird angle to where it looks like they're melding. And it's just such a cool shot for like the sort of like symbolism of sex that their silhouettes are blending together and becoming indistinguishable.
That's really cool. I didn't even notice that. I also think it's worth noting how he's very like fascinated with kind of traditional photography rules, right? Where like how I guess like the mise en scène kind of sort of needs to frame the action, right? The characters specifically. Like there's always like trees or doorways or bushes or tables that kind of put the characters into like a box, like it kind of keep our focus. Not all the scenes, but in like all of his still scenes, I feel like, or all of his still shots, I should say. But and I love the scene because that kind of all builds up to this scene right where he's to burn the house, and we get, I think it's shot of this open window. Then we go to the room where like the tables or stuff are in, and he's like, we have what is originally an open space. Once again, an open frame. I think slightly askew with relation to the door that went to the table, but he clutters it up, and it's like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? You're kind of taking us away from this perfect portrait, and it's because his action's nonsensical, right? He's about to burn everything, and then we go back, and he even like teases us where he'll go back and forth between like these two rooms, one with isn't cluttered, and you could like have this really nice like picturesque sort of shot, and then back to the cluttered table, which is like just tension building, and then he burns it. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I guess with that, making pretty good time right now. You guys ready to vote?
Yeah, I think so.
I think we can do it.
I have a feeling I know where this is going, but let's start with the man, the myth, the legend, Derek Schwarzenegger. Derek, which movie are you voting for?
I felt Days of Wrath was like a good movie. There's nothing character or story wise to draw me in other than like, holy shit, this movie is in 1946 and that chick is hella banging that stepson.
So I assume you're voting for The Sacrifice?
Yeah, but then also The Sacrifice was like, this is kind of cool, all this stuff, and I like the themes and the lighting and stuff, but it's kind of wankery for like 2.5 hours and like this could be cut down to 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So I was like, it's kind of just like wankery on one hand and boring on the other. So I was like, I guess so. But then it was like, I kind of just like, there's more interesting things in The Sacrifice, like that I could just like that drawed me in enough that I was willing to watch it for 2 hours. Other than this podcast, like I could definitely see myself just like sitting through 2.5 hours of this wankery, just because of the theme. So I'm gonna vote Sacrifice.
It's not in the same way, but it's kind of like Ozu level of good vibes. You know what I mean? With just go.
Definitely, I agree. I was getting like some floating weeds vibe from like the beginning. I was like, this is pretty good. I was digging the like first 20 minutes like big time.
Floating weeds is definitely like significantly more action heavy, and also just it's more about shot comp, and how it's not nearly as like static shots, but or it's more static shots, but not there's a lot more shots. But yeah, it's just like it's peaceful to watch, like I could just listen to people talk forever. Anyways, speaking of listening to people talk forever, I should shut up Caleb, which one are you voting for?
I feel like Derek, you are completely a man after my own heart. You summed up those two movies pretty expertly. I feel like, actually, in a lot of ways, Day of Wrath was kind of a cleaner movie. I think, like, especially now that we're talking about it, it hits me a lot more like viscerally, like, ooh man, that's some juicy drama. But even though I think like there was a lot of wankery involved in the sacrifice, like exactly like what we mentioned before about like the woman just like screaming and screaming over and over, being over the top and maybe like a bit too long and a bit overly confusing. I think like even if it was less clean to me and less like well packaged, it had a lot more to talk about and a lot more going on, and was probably more ambitious in a lot of ways. So yeah, sacrifice.
Yeah, I don't think ambition should necessarily be rewarded if it doesn't kind of fulfill on its promise. But I do think the sacrifice fulfills on its promise. I would also vote for the sacrifice if my vote mattered. Honestly, I love the movie. I think you guys are even being a bit too harsh. I think it's like top 25 movie of all time potentially for me. I've really enjoyed it.
I would definitely put it up there. If I feel like there was a lot of good scenes, a lot of good shots. The cinematography and the lighting and everything, and the shifting colors and the themes was really good. But then it was like I was just watching it. I was like, this is really cool, but this is such wankery. I could cut down this one shot to like by like 5 minutes.
Yeah, but he does such creative things with the shots, Derek, and that's what's important.
That I agree. That's what's important, but it's still like 5 minutes of my time each shot, pretty much. I think.
I
Well,
also like I think for me like the inability to kind of like piece things together can be a bit frustrating. Like if it's too dense and too not maybe that dense is the right word, but like
a lot going on.
yeah, that and also like the things might be conflicting and it's just like too uncertain. Like I think it's definitely true that like that movie did not have a cut and dry explanation. Like I think a lot of it's left up to interpretation. So that can kind of bug me sometimes. I think if that's not handled really well, and I think the dream sequence in particular, like I have a bit of a dichotomy here because dream sequences, like it was all a dream type thing, even though it's not confirmed what was happening, is one of my least favorite things. Is that in the end, it was all a dream. Like that's so frustrating to me. And but also one of my favorite movies of all time, Eight and a Half by Federico Fellini, deals with dreams so expertly that it makes it all worth it. So dreams, like movies, are I don't know. I feel particularly critical of them because I've seen it when it's done really, really well and can be fulfilling and enjoyable. So, but it's hard to do. It's hard to make a dream sequence feel fulfilling and enjoyable because it didn't actually happen.
Sure. Yeah, but I mean, it's also debatable whether it's all a dream sequence,
That's true.
right?
Yeah, that's what I kind of like, because it was like, is this shifting color in response to the theme of like order versus chaos, or is it in respect to this being a dream? Whatever. I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah,
Well,
I just think it had some of the best cinematography of like any movie I've ever seen.
yeah, it was so, I mean, so like creatively done, I would say.
Hmm.
You know, kind of like I feel like, if Tarantino is a better director, like this is what he would want to do. You know what I mean? Just like a bunch of dialogue, um, and really like weird shots, but like, unfortunately, I
Yeah.
do not think Tarantino's talented enough to pull something off like this. But Andrei Tarkovsky is, and he moves on. I haven't been doing this, but I feel like I should. Our Andrei Tarkovsky movie for next week is going to be, or not next week, for the next round will be Solaris, which is top four. I think are all significantly more popular than Sacrifice. So I'm curious to see what we think of these. And then also just to kind of catch up with the other directors. Stanley Kubrick, I think I already mentioned this, but next round will be A Clockwork Orange, and F.W. Murnau's next round will be Taboo, which I'm a bit worried about for my boy Murnau. We're talking about Solaris, Clockwork Orange, and I don't know. I don't think Taboo is quite as popular, but if you can make it past that, his top three are all pretty big movies. So we'll see. But enough about the past. Let's go talk about enough about the far future. Let's talk about the near future. what two directors do you guys want to do next?
Let me look real quick.
For the Argentino, we have Hitchcock versus Visconti, Wells versus De Sica, Fellini versus Allen, Godard versus David Lynch, Francis Ford Coppola versus Alberto Rossellini, John Renoir versus Steven Spielberg, Ingmar Bergman
I want
versus...
to do Bergman.
You want to do Ingmar Bergman versus Kenji Mizoguchi?
Yeah, either Bergman or Buñuel.
Luis Brunel, that'd be an interesting one.
Yeah,
I'm down
that's
for
what I
some
was thinking.
Bergman.
What?
I'm down for some Bergman.
You want to do some Bergie? Okay, I'm
Yeah.
down for Bergie as well.
So
Cries and Whispers.
have you been keeping track of which podcasts come down to 2-1 versus which ones are unanimous?
Well, there hasn't much to keep track of yet, but you think I should?
That might just be interesting. I was just curious.
Yeah, I'm done. Maybe even I can put all of our individual votes. I'll put it on the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be interesting statistics to see.
Yeah, so you guys have if that's all we have to say. Next week we'll be watching Cries and Whispers by Ingmar Bergman and Street of Shame by Kenji Mizoguchi. I think Mizoguchi is the only person on this list who I've never watched any of their films. So I'm actually pretty excited.
Yeah, that's why I was excited too.
And then, of course, Bergman is, I'm literally the exact opposite, but probably the person in this list I've watched the most of their films. And interestingly enough, though, Cries and Whispers is probably, one of the few movies of his that I haven't watched. So it'd be a very interesting contrast. But until next time, I'm Matthew Moore, and with Caleb Ferguson and Derek Schwarzinski. Remember, this is the greatest movie director podcast ever. And goodbye, everybody.